This woman was used to seeing animals in her garden because she lived near the forest. But one day, she saw an animal she had never seen before. The mysterious animal made her nervous and anxious, so she decided to call for help. With help, she started a search, but it wouldn't go as expected. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Charlotte loved her home. It was a little remote and near the woods, so she would see all kinds of animals in her garden. But this time it was different. Charlotte was looking out over her garden when her eyes suddenly halted on a shadowy figure on the border. It was an animal. Her eyes grew wide as she stared at the animal. It looked wild and dangerous. It definitely wasn't domesticated. What was it? Charlotte fumbled a little as she grabbed her phone and took a picture of the animal. It made her uncomfortable, and she wanted to know if it was dangerous and if there was an old acquaintance from high school who could probably help her. She looked through her phone for his number and dialed him. The acquaintance, Joe, was a hunter and agreed to come over. Once he arrived, Charlotte showed him the picture and explained what she saw. Looks like a canine animal, definitely some sort of predator, Joe said, fueling Charlotte's fear. Why is it here? Joe asked her to show him where the animal stood and gestured for her to come with him. Once there, her fears became true as they found remains. This animal was a predator and dangerous. With that information, the duo returned to the house. Charlotte was worried, and when she looked at Joe, she saw a mixture of nerves and excitement. The hunter explained he didn't have the right equipment and needed to go home to prepare better. After a draining night, Charlotte got up and immediately went to her back door. The moment she set foot in her garden, her body froze. There were paw prints near the door. She did hear the animal last night. Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest as she called Joe. She didn't like this at all. Charlotte paced around the room while on the phone with Joe, but she suddenly halted. There, the animal was again on the border of her garden. "Hurry up," she exclaimed to Joe over the phone, explaining that she was looking at the mysterious animal right now. Moments later, the hunter arrived. "Let's go," the hunter said. "Be careful and stay behind me," Joe urged Charlotte when he saw fresh tracks. The duo tracked the paw prints and other traces deeper and deeper into the woods. Charlotte and Joe abruptly stopped, and as they did, the rustling did as well. The duo looked around them and listened carefully. But it seemed they weren't careful enough because a few minutes later, they suddenly heard a low growl. It was hard to place where it came from as it seemed to come from multiple directions. That was the final straw. "Let's go back," Charlotte said with a quivering voice. She grabbed his hand and opened her mouth to urge him, but no sound came out. Because suddenly the animal came into view. It was running away from them. "Let's go," Joe said as he grabbed Charlotte by the arm. The fact that the animal was running away relieved Charlotte, and her curiosity was sparked when she saw the animal again. She had never seen anything like it before. Joe's grip around her arm tightened as they struggled to keep up. Like out of nowhere, where did he come from? And what does he want with the mysterious animal? There was only one way to answer all their questions following him. He wasn't aware of their presence, so they could find out what was going on if they were careful. The fact that an unknown man captured the animal made Charlotte even more curious. What could it be? She stayed close behind him and followed the man, who eventually led them to a clearing with a cabin. He struggled with the animal as he tried to get it inside a cage. But then Charlotte's eyes grew big, because the cage the man was busy with wasn't the only one. Beside it stood two more cages which were filled with the same kind of mysterious animal. Charlotte's mind was racing. There were more? What were they? What was this man doing? "What is going on?" she asked with a quivering voice. "We should call the police," she whispered, but Joe shook his head to show his disapproval of her idea. "Those animals are dangerous. Who knows how they would react when police come barging in? We have to solve this problem delicately," he said. This seemed odd to Charlotte, but he was the expert, so she trusted his opinion. They stared at the huge man, who vanished inside the cabin. Charlotte was hesitant as she didn't know what to do. Joe took the lead and Charlotte hesitantly followed him. Step by step, they got closer to the cabin, and it seemed like they would make it. But then the animals suddenly started growling. Without any indication, the front door of the cabin flew open, and the huge man came out with an axe in his hand. "No, what are you doing here?" Charlotte couldn't contain her fear, so she screamed and sobbed. "We're sorry. We will leave." But as suddenly as the man appeared, so sudden did his He tried to calm Charlotte down by explaining he thought they were someone else and wanted to scare them away. The man put away his axe and repeated his first question. "What are you doing here?" he asked. The man didn't seem eager to respond, so Joe aimed his rifle at him. "Let these animals go, or I will shoot," Joe said with a severe tone as he cocked his rifle. She had been standing beside the cages, and the question that had been bothering her for the last 2 days needed answering. "What is this animal? It's been terrorizing me in my garden," he said seriously as his expression suddenly turned dark. Charlotte frowned as she watched the man. What was going on? But then the man turned back to Joe. "As I said, I can explain everything," he said. He then started by saying that he had found these 3 animals wandering around, making him curious as they weren't from here. They seemed to come from a secretive structure further into the woods. The building was highly secured with cameras and fences, so we couldn't get a look inside. But the fact that these animals were wandering around such a suspicious building said enough for him. "I think there are people illegally breeding these animals inside the building," he said with a sigh. The man sighed and explained he had no proof there actually were any breeders. He was still trying to figure the situation out. "Right now, I look like a criminal. I didn't want to contact the police until I had the facts straight then." The man sat on the bench in front of his cabin, and everything changed at that moment. Because all of a sudden, the man was struggling on the ground. "And now I finally found them." Charlotte didn't know what she was hearing. Even though he was tied up, the man kept struggling furiously. "So you're one of them?" "I was right," he exclaimed to Joe. The hunter just nodded, and an eerie smile appeared on his face. "Time to bring the good news," Joe said as he took out his phone with his free hand. With his focus on the man and his phone call, Charlotte grabbed her chance. It felt like her body moved on her own as she grabbed a big branch and hit Joe on his head. She quickly untied the man. "I never thought he would do something like that," Charlotte said apologetically. Charlotte and the man explained everything when the police arrived, and the man guided them toward the secretive building. Joe agreed to grant them access and told them how many co-conspirators there were for a sentence reduction, and within moments, the police raid was successful. During the raid, the police found enough evidence to put the breeders away for a long time, but Charlotte and the man were still a part of the trial, because their testimonials ensured the breeders got an even longer sentence. Thanks to their efforts, the illegal breeding operation was stopped, and when that was arranged, Charlotte could finally return home and relax.